Okay. Oh, and we'll get JT.
Remember?
Yeah.
Look at us. Our quorum all. Is this little door
Representative
open?
Byron over there.
I was gonna grab that.
Sorry,
Well, that's
JT.
rude if you just go, see if you try to open the side door on her camper.
What happened?
Okay. Thanks, everybody. We're back. It's 1:33. We're back at it. And so we will continue with Game and Fish. I guess we're looking on the update on the free and reduced license program, recoupment program. So Director, if you would like to take that on. And Luke, if you would want to come up.
Yeah, Madam Chair, I'll let Luke get started if he'd like, and
Yeah, that sounds
I'll
good.
fill in anything
Okay,
he needs.
Luke, if you want to start this rolling.
Absolutely. Madam Chair, at the last meeting, there was a discussion on the free and reduced price license recoupment program. And, there was a discussion about, there was a request for a bill draft to make the program mandatory. And I just wanted to just give a brief update kind of on the current status of this program and just for the committee's information. This program is already essentially mandatory because Game and Fish is not part of the budget. They're not part of the general appropriations bill. This program actually runs through the state auditor's office. And so each year, the current statute requires that the chief fiscal officer of the Game and Fish Department prepare and certify a report on the licenses that are issued for this program. And once that report is received from Game and Fish by the state auditor's office, they are required to, it says that the state auditor shall transfer to the Game and Fish Fund the amount claimed on the payment request from funds appropriated for this program to the extent available. And so essentially what has happened is that during the 2021-2022 biennium, that funding, when there were budget cuts, budget reductions, that funding was cut and it was no longer included in the SAO's budget. And I believe it, from around there, it was about $1.6 million would be the funding request. But as I mentioned, it was cut because of the COVID-related budgetary reductions. And so we could, certainly a bill could still be drafted to make it more mandatory. There was just a couple thoughts there that if you require SAO to fund the program, whether or not there are funds available, it just would have to come out of their budget one way or another. And because this is more on the, on the appropriation side, the funds are not available. There just is a concern that requiring that Game and Fish receive these funds each year may be considered binding future legislatures. So those were just kind of a couple of reasons that it hasn't been changed. It is still essentially a mandatory program if the funds are there. And so there has been a letter drafted from this committee to JAC to encourage them to fund the program. So that's my brief update, but of course, be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for Luke? Director, do you have anything to add?
Madam Chair, thank you. Luke covered it well. I think that if the committee does, I would just ask that the committee consider sending that letter to JAC. I think that's
And that letter has been
We
sent.
already have. So,
that's all I have on that, Madam
okay,
Chair.
perfect. So hopefully we can have that program started again. Have you been sending the forms to the auditor in those years that that there wasn't funding?
Madam Chairman, since the reduction in 2021 biennium, we have not provided the other reports to them except just this most recent year.
All right, that's great. So I think that with that direction, we can maybe get this program rolling again and get you guys reimbursed again. That would
We
be
appreciate
awesome.
your work on this. Thank you.
Sure. Okay, moving down our agenda, did we have any public comment on the reduced and license fee recoupment program? Nope. So I don't know that we have any committee directives from this going forward. Does anyone have anything that they would like to ask LSO about? Nope. Oh, Madam Co-Chairman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just one question on the bill that we tabled. Would there be any way to get some of that information, data that you're collecting before we get to that next meeting from you folks? I mean, I know you were going to prepare some. I'm not sure if Director Nesbitt was or not, and I know county commissioners also, but be any possible to get some of that before we get there, just to kind of peruse it?
Madam Chair, yes, of course, we could do that.
Okay, thank you.
And Madam Chair, we're going to work with County Commissioners Association with whatever data they're putting together, and we'll work together and try to get that to the committee long before the next meeting.
So I guess that was our continuation of topics from the morning, and now we're moving on to commercial fishing. Do we have?
So Madam Chair, I'll give you a quick little bit of background, and then I'll ask Chief Osterlund to talk about maybe some of the details of the bill that we felt like probably fit the bill, so to speak. There, as you recall, last year when this issue came up, I mean, this has come up. I sound like a broken record today because I keep talking about bills that have been discussed over and over and over again. This topic, anyway, has been in front of you over the past 6 to 8 years, I would say. Multiple different bill drafts. Last year, I believe the committee ended up with 4 different ideas. There was a working group. Working group narrowed it down to a couple bills, and then those bills failed. We felt like the bill that had the most potential and certainly covered most of Game and Fish's concerns was the second bill, and I'm going to have Chief Osterlund talk through the highlights of that bill here real quick, if that's your pleasure.
That's great. Chief Osterlund? So do we have this in our packet, or was it a late addition?
Yeah, I'm not sure which bill specifically we were going to be talking about today, so no, it's not included in the packet.
Okay, great.
So, Madam Chair, committee members, I'm Alan Osterlund, Chief of Fisheries. And so you might recall last year during this meeting, we discussed 4 different bills that the subcommittee had worked on. And the bill that the director referenced would have been 24 LSO 0141. And that bill, draft bill, effectively gave the authority for regulation and licensing to the State of Wyoming Outfitter Board. So basically, right now, the Outfitter Board provides the licensing and oversight for big game outfitters. It included some language in there that just included fishing outfitters and guides, and put some language in there in the board as far as 2 representatives of the industry onto the board, and some other things I won't go into. But the reasoning we feel that this is a good place for this to reside is that I've mentioned many times and that right now our fisheries resource is able to sustain the commercial use, with probably one exception, and that's potentially here on the North Platte. So it's not a resource issue for us. It's more of a social issue where there's crowding, conflicts between resident fishermen and commercial outfitters. Right now, there is some oversight on some stretches of rivers. BLM has some restrictions, Forest Service has some requirements, and Teton County has some requirements. Other than that, it's pretty open. So the issues for us, and which I mentioned before, is that we feel this would be a better nest for the program. Sportsmen's dollars are what is pretty much maintaining the Game and Fish Department. And within the Fisheries Division, we have some licensing fees that cover fishing licenses, but that doesn't pay for the program itself. That comes from big game license sales mostly. And if we were to bring on the oversight and regulation permitting per se of the outfitting guiding industry, it would take away our biologists' work on what the sportsman's dollars feel like should go to, which is management. And as we do with a lot of different sister agencies, we would provide any kind of information, any kind of support that we can to the outfitter board if the committee does decide to go this route. Dr.
So Chief, is it 24 LSO 10141? Is that the one? So I can send this out to the committee from our last year's meeting? Oh, perfect.
Madam Chair, I just sent it
Thanks,
as
Luke.
well, and we're printing copies right now.
Okay. So, Director?
Yeah, Madam Chair, I think the only other thing, just most folks probably remember, but this was a bill that I don't believe it ever got debated. It just failed introduction. So this committee's passed it last year out of committee to go to the budget session. I think Chief Osterland outlined, there's a lot more details to this we can certainly go into, but this committee's heard a lot of this multiple times before, so I don't know how much you'd like us to spend on it.
So, Chief, would you mind just going over, I'm looking at page 2. Would you mind just going over the bill? I think everybody has it in your inbox now. And are we going to get hard copies?
Yes, Madam Chair, we're printing them right now.
Okay. I guess as we're waiting for that, I'm going to ask Mr. Livingston to come up and put on his Wyoga hat. State Board hat, whatever hat he's wearing right now. But thanks for joining us as well. Thank you. So if you want to kind of tell us how this would integrate into the Outfitters and Guides.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, Lee Livingston, member of the Wyoming State Board of Outfitters and Guides, and with me is our administrator who runs everything, Amanda McKee. We've discussed it with our board, and if this is the direction that comes out of from the legislation, we can do it. Adding 2 board members, there are a few costs that are kind of ambiguous. We are a self-funded agency, meaning that our license fees are what funds the agency. And so depending upon how many fishing outfitters might come on board would determine, how much we would have to charge, how much more staff we'd have to put on. The one thing I caution folks against, a lot of this came from people that are worried about the crowding issue with commercial outfitters and the public, commercial outfitters and commercial outfitters. But currently, in our statute, we do not have the authority to regulate areas of operation. We can make suggestions, but we do not have the final say on who can operate in what area. And so I'm not sure that this would cure what a lot of folks are worried about. On a personal level, as an outfitter, professional outfitter, and a member of the board, I believe it is an industry that should have some regulation on it. I believe that any outfitting industry that is commercially taking clients for experiences in Wyoming probably should have an outfitter license. But again, if we take this on, we might not be able to achieve what a lot of folks are wanting to have achieved without some work on the current statute, which we are governed under.
So, Mr. Livingston, a hunting outfitter buys a license from the state, but then their geographic area is then not regulated by the state, but it's regulated by the National Forest Service or a private landowner, wherever they are doing their outfitting. Is that what I understand?
Madam Chair, correct. The majority of the outfitters, well, all the outfitters have an area that they operate in, and they have to present that to us. we can make suggestions. If they are operating on national forest, they have a national forest permit. If they're operating on BLM, they have a BLM special use permit. If they're operating on private land, they're gonna have private land authorization from the private landowners. That's who regulates where they can operate. And you know, we do run into problems where we have some folks that come in and they start small, and then a month after they receive their license or a year after they receive their license, they decide to get great big, and we can't, as a board, cannot deny them if the land management agency allows it.
So as we did our tour last year on the North Platte here, then some of that is regulated by the BLM, and they have to have a BLM permit to be on that part of the river. And then is that common throughout the state? Maybe Representative Byron might have a better answer to that.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chairwoman. These are, to Lee's point, every one of these operational areas are dependent on the jurisdiction of the land being used. So, and it's widespread. If you're up in my neck of the woods, you have 3 different jurisdictions: National Park Service, county, and then National Forest Service. If you're down in Sublette County, you have a mix of BLM game and fish. If you're on the Platte, a mix of private BLM game and fish. If you're in Thermopolis, a mix of town, county, and public, game and fish access points. So it is very complicated. I think to Lee's point, the intent last year of the direction we went on the bill that failed, I believe House Bill 17 that failed introduction, was to have more of an oversight on the actual rivers being fished, and that was the ultimate intent of the working group. This was, I think, a close second, this bill that's being discussed right now, in terms of what we could do. And at the time, and I've heard rumor, kind of whispers of this at the time, the Outfitters Guys Board, if this body remembers, was operating on almost a net neutral revenue, and was a bit, didn't know if they wanted to take on this type of a responsibility. And at the end of the day, I think we're talking about 2 issues here. We're talking about a level of expectations as an outfitter, and Lee alluded to this, all across the board. Any type of outfitting needs a standard level if they're coming to our state and doing it, in my opinion. The second thing we're talking about, to the director's point, the experience. Science can go both ways depending on the water flow year, snowpack year, bug life. Some of the surveys of the rivers, the fish are great, but 90%, 80%, 70% of, we talked about it, defective mouths or wounds due to overfishing. But really what I've seen in my 20 years, and I'm no longer an outfitter, but in my 20 years, is it's the social experience where, I'm hearing stories now 2 weeks ago of the New Fork, which is no wider than this room, of 10 boats launching on one section because it is a free-for-all. I'm hearing stories of Thermopolis where you put in at the Wedding of the Waters, which I believe is a game fish access point, you can take out in town 60 boats. I mean, the shuttle gals doing great. It's a business maybe we should all get into. 60 boats a day. So we have the scientific evidence that can support or not support depending on the year and a bunch of different dynamics. And where it went, at least in Teton County, it's the social experience of what are you after? And to Lee's point, from my experience in the outfitting world up in the thoroughfare, they're pretty good at self-regulating. Here's the draw that you guys get, here's the draw I get. The river users, for 20 plus years, the commercial outfitting has tried to do that and failed to self-regulate. So, what came out of committee last year is not the bill we're discussing, but I think out of respect for time and the complexity of this issue, and to Director Nisvik's point, it's been in front of the body multiple years and it continues to be discussed. So maybe at this point, it's time to quickly form another working group to try to get to our 3rd meeting and figure out if there's anything. I will tell you, I'm becoming deflated on this one because, I thought we brought good stuff out. It failed because of the budget session vote, 38-22. It was close. And I had wonderful discussions with Lee and the department and trying to figure out if this is the direction we want to go. But I think that that would be, as the person that chaired that group last year, direction that this committee might want to consider. And we probably don't need to look at all 4 bill drafts, I think, because I think we quickly eliminated 2, but maybe these 2 that, one that's being presented that was just sent out, and then the one that actually made it out of committee last year, and consider those 2. I just think that if there's no ability, we're not doing the public any service if we can't regulate the experience. And that's really what we heard. We heard it on the river last year on our tour, when we sat at Gray Reef and heard the line in the spring can be up to 70 boats long. And whether or not these jurisdictions choose to or have the manpower to enforce these is a different discussion. But you also run into the private property rights discussion where the unintended consequences, if you regulate, some of these ranches are big enough for a full day float or walk fishing. And we won't have the ability, I don't believe, unless it maybe goes towards the outfitter board, to do any of that. So I think right now, I would maybe we can continue with the presentation, but consider that we go towards a working group between now and our next meeting, which I believe is the end of September, and figure out if we can get any momentum to bring to this committee to take to the floor next 2025.
Madam Co-Chair.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just to follow up with Representative Byron, again, because both of these ended up in the House and didn't get out, I was just kind of curious as to what some of the issues were that some of the folks had in the House. Was it because it was a budget session, or did they feel like the bills need some tweaking or some things that we could do to make them better? Because, again, we got this through Management Council again, because there are some concerns from some of the folks on Management Council that they're hearing from their constituents that they're not having a very good experience on their waters fishing because of all the crowding. So I think they want us to do something. And I'm not sure, again, what were the problems? Maybe you can answer that in the bill.
Thank you, Madam
Bills.
Madam Co-Chair. I was an aye vote on both of them, obviously, and I spoke that I will be supporting whether or not it comes out of this committee, which I hope something does, or individually, moving forward when we had our strategy discussions. But I can't speak to why there were no votes. They were a victim of day one, hour one, minute one, and that's where they ended. I think that if folks realized the impact this is having on Wyoming, and I guess I often hear, well, it's not my problem, we don't have rivers in our neck of the woods. Well, that's why we went to the Gray Reef and toured it and tried to spend some time. But at the end of the day, I'm not sure why there was resistance to the bills, because they did make it out of this committee, and but they both did fail day one in the House.
Any other comments, questions? I don't know that the bill that we're talking about, that it made it, do you know a bill number? I'm trying to look it up.
Madam Co-Chair,
40.
the bill that, if I may, the bill that made it was House Bill 17.
I found, but the
Yeah, which
other one,
was, the title of that bill is Fishing Outfitters and Guide Registration of Fishing Boats. And that is the bill that I was aware of that made it out of that working group. And I know that there has been discussion since with the Outfitters and Guide Boards that this could be another option, but I had leaned away from that last time because of a number of points of testimony we received when we were here last year.
okay. Any other comments from the committee? Madam Co-Chair.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just maybe from the outfitter's point of view, I mean, I know you said you had a couple of extra board members that would need to be added, or were they added in light of this, first of all? So you already have those two board members?
No,
Oh, you
Madam
don't?
Chair, no, we do
Okay.
not.
So you'd probably have to have a couple more if you had to regulate. Do you see any other issues in terms of, some of the anecdotal stuff that, Representative Byron just talked about in terms of crowding and various fisheries that we need to take a look at?
So, Madam Chair,
Mr. Livingston.
Madam Co-Chair, again, I see this as basically two different things. As far as licensure of the outfitter, the commercial outfitter, and my administrator might punch me, but I don't think we would have any problem doing that. I think if we want to add a couple more board members, right now the board is made up of 4 hunting outfitters because it's a hunting board. 2 public at large, a game and fish rep, and there's our 7 right there. We foresee adding 2 from the fishing industry if this moves forward that we're regulating fishing outfitters. So again, the licensure, and we'd have to go through, because everyone that comes in front of us has to test, has to pass an examination, has to have, the only thing, has to have an area of authorization where they're going to be operating. I don't see any problems with us doing that. It might be a little bit of a learning curve, but we're not reinventing the wheel. Again, for us to have authority over where they can operate, there needs to be some statute change. Speaker Summers and I worked together on a bill that I don't think he ever brought out, that was modeled somewhat after the Idaho model, in that Idaho Outfitter Board has authority over where you operate. They can say yes or no. They have authority over all outfitting in the state of Idaho. And I think if I recall, I think that's what he modeled the bill that he was contemplating after. I think LSO might have done a draft, but it never saw the light of day.
Would you foresee, and I guess this is maybe a question for Amanda, would you foresee needing more staff?
Madam Chair, bare minimum, we would need another investigator for the state. Right now, we have one that covers the whole state for the big game side of things. So bringing in another investigator, whether we split the state in half, or one does fishing, one does hunting, that would definitely be a must.
And would you need someone on the administration side?
I would like to say yes, but I can't for sure say that without knowing how many fishing outfitters are going to be licensed.
Right.
And that's the tough part too, is trying to figure out how many there are in the state. Many of them, like Lee, for example, his permits have fishing on them already. Would he have to hold a separate license on top of that? So there's those logistic things that we'd have to work through, I think.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions from the committee? So I guess I think that Representative Byron's suggestion that we redo the working group is a good one. I guess maybe, do we need a motion, or do we just assign a group?
Madam Chair, I don't believe you need a motion. I think, you just have the authority to form a working group of the committee.
But I would like to get the feeling of the committee. Raise your hand if you feel like a working group's a good idea on this particular issue.
There's 2 up there too.
6, 7. So we're tied, so
You get to decide that.
okay. All right, then, so the majority of the committee supports a working group. So I think I will leave that to Representative Byron to assign that committee, because I don't know who's valuable to you. So if you would take that on, I would appreciate it.
Yeah, Madam Co-Chair, I will certainly do that, and I will model it off of, last year's working group. We had a fair amount of productive conversations, and I mean, albeit quick meetings, but we narrowed it down and got a pretty darn good bill out of here and onto the floor. So not quite onto the floor, but yeah, so I'm happy to take that charge and model it. I'll have to reference some notes from last year, and LSO and I worked extensively on this bill last year. So yeah, it's just to ease everyone's, if you can give me that latitude, I'm happy to just kind of mimic it off of last year's.
And maybe look at what Speaker Summers had done. I think it was 2 years ago.
I was a co-sponsor on that bill. so
Okay.
I-
All right, great. So, yes, Senator Ellis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to explain my vote a little bit. I think committee work is supposed, you were trying to think of it as a funnel. It starts out broad, and then we're supposed to narrow in. And, on the Senate side, we serve on generally more committees than House members. And so I've just been a part of lots of committees where that is the word of the day, is let's do a work group. I think, and just want to be really respectful of our staff and, how much the workload they take on. And I don't disagree that this isn't an important issue, but I think of all the important issues I've tackled over the years, and sometimes they just come in the form of individual bills. So I don't, just want to be clear, I don't disagree that there's a problem. I think it needs more work, but that's why I was a no, is I just don't want another working group.
And you don't want to be on it.
So.
And that's why I voted no. I
So
also don't want to be on that working group.
I guess Representative Senator Ellis is off your list for on the working group. Okay, so is that acceptable to go
Madam, yeah,
forward?
it works.
that way?
I do want to go on record that I did offer game and fish property taxes in exchange for fishing outfitters, and I was turned down.
Very quickly, and if you want me to say anything derogatory about Huntington specifically, I'll be glad to do that.
So it looks like Mr. Livingston was changing from commissioner hat to Wyoga hat to.
I think you should scold him for that, Madam Chair.
You think? Well, my scoldings generally are ineffective, I have found. Okay, so I think that is our last topic for, I can find my, there it is. So as I look at my agenda, I think that was the last thing that we needed to talk about with game and fish. But do stay close because we will maybe have some questions about some of these other things, so. Thank you.
Madam Chair, if
Thank
you're
you.
going to continue with Predators Working Group report, I'll just stay up here till that's done, if that
Okay,
works for you.
that would be great. So although we are a little bit ahead of schedule, I think we will go to the report from the Treatment of Predators Working Group, and I will ask Chairman Storer to give her report on that.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The Treatment of Predators Working Group met on,
Representative Storer, can you move closer to your microphone? We can barely hear you.
oh, hold on just a second, let me try it. How is that? That
About the
better?
same.
Oh.
So shout at us.
Okay, I will articulate loudly. The Treatment of Predators Working Group met on Tuesday, June 25th in Lander. The committee took written public comment through the LSO website, but did not take verbal comment during the meeting. The overwhelming majority of the comments we received, however, indicated support for a variety of actions. Those included deleting or modifying the exemptions for predatory animals from Wyoming's animal abuse statutes, prohibiting the intentional injury or death of an animal with a motorized vehicle, extending the concepts of ethical fair chase hunting to the taking of predators, extending the principles found in the North American model of wildlife conservation, such that the taking of wildlife should be for legitimate, non-frivolous purposes, essentially outlawing torture, and extending the humane treatment of animals to predators. The public also asked if Wyoming might consider incentivizing non-lethal approaches to predator management that have proven to allow for better coexistence of predators and humans in other places. However, the committee did not pursue those actions. Rather, it focused on statutory changes to require that an injured or disabled animal be promptly euthanized. We directed LSO to draft language that could be included in both Title VI in the animal abuse statutes and Title 23 in the predator management statutes, as we did not determine which of these was preferred. This would result in a separate violation that could result in an additional fine for the actions that Mr. Roberts took last winter. We did discuss that game wardens, like deputy sheriffs, have the discrimination to set the size of the fine Mr. Roberts received up to $1,000 and or require them to go before a judge to make a plea. Thus, we did not address higher fines for the violation he received. We also discussed that livestock producers believe that running over an animal may be more humane than shooting them at a distance in order to preemptively manage predators using lethal methods. We will meet again by Zoom in late August or early September to review the drafts from LSO and make a recommendation to this committee. That's my report. Other members of the committee may wish to provide additional comments.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions from the committee? So I think that was good. Oh, Senator Grew. No, false alarm. Then I think what we will do, as we did at our meeting last time, at our first meeting, was we will allow for probably, is anyone here in the present want to testify on the predator management? Okay. So if you would like to come up. So I think what we'll do is give you 2 minutes. Or do you want a time? And Representative Western will time 2-minute response, or 2-minute. So if you could state your name and let us know your affiliation.
Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the TRW. My name is Donald O'Toole. I live in Laramie. The working committee is dodging the main issue, which has come up with the public, and that is whether Wyoming's animal protection laws should extend to listed predators. The most distasteful part of my job as a veterinary pathologist for more than 30 years was doing autopsies on animals that died after being neglected, abused, and tortured. Sometimes it was a dog that was doused in lighter fluid, set alight, and dumped on a girlfriend's doorstep. Sometimes it was a cat shot multiple times with a nail gun and a BB pellet and a BB gun, including in her eyes, her face, and her perineum. Sweet Pea the cat managed to make it home, but then died in Steve Kerr's veterinary clinic. Other times it was wildlife or starved horses. Occasionally it was cattle. But for each of these cases, it was a legal recourse. If I or my pathology colleagues did our job right, perpetrated ended up before a judge. There is no legal recourse for yote mashing. The sport of yote mashing combines thrill-seeking with sadism. The sport is sufficiently widespread in Wyoming that it has a name. The TRW received a letter from Bob Lanka and 24 past presidents of the Wildlife Society. This is the society that produces the Journal of Wildlife Management. It sets the standard. Mr. Lanka is retired from a career from Wyoming Game and Fish and lived in Laramie. In my naivete, I assumed someone like Mr. Lanka would be on the working committee. He was not. So I encourage you to read the letter that Mr. Lanka sent. It's time, I think, for lawmakers to discuss the extent and acceptability of this practice.
Your time is up. Thank you.
Thank you for your attention.
Anyone else in the room?
Hello, Madam Chair and committee. I wanted to thank you all for working on this issue. I know it's
Can you introduce
complicated.
yourself, please?
Oh, I'm Sylvia Bagdonis. I'm with YCAP from Laramie. But I wanted to thank you for working on this issue. I know it's been complicated, and there's a lot of issues involved in it. As a parent and a citizen, I am very concerned about the ramifications on the citizens, and particularly young people, as they're viewing what happened here in this story. First of all, when the incident happened, it was hidden from the public, and it's only because there was a release to the media that we began to know about it. Initially, it was said, oh, this is just an unusual incident, and since then, we have become aware through the media that the practice of running over wildlife, at least on 85% of the public lands, is very common. And so I believe that there's an issue related to the values, ethics, and the culture that is extended through education to our young people, and I'm really concerned about that. I know when my kids were young, I went to course with them to learn about hunting, and the hunter course, and in that, there was a lot of talk about ethics and values, and I'm just wondering what has happened with all that. So I'm hoping that you will take a look at the public's request, and as been stated before, to ban the use of motorized vehicle to chase, run over, and torture wildlife who, because they just happen to be in an area are considered as targets and a fun thing, which has become, according to the media, a sport in the state. And in addition, I hope that you will look at amending the animal cruelty laws so that we can consider all wildlife in those laws. But I thank you again.
Thank you. Anyone else in the room want to comment on the Predator Working Group? Nope. We have people online?
2.
Oh, we have a special guest, Senator Boner. Thank you for joining us. Welcome, Mr. Moline. Can you introduce yourself and give your comments?
Yes, Madam Chairman, Brett Moline, Wyoming Farm Bureau Federation. I attended the meeting of the working group. I believe the direction that that group has taken is adequate and will be effective to take care of the problem, an isolated problem that was done recreationally, to try to, I appreciate the work that they did, and I think they're going in the right direction. And with that, Madam Chairman, I'd sit for any questions you may have.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Moline? Thank you so much for your comment. Anyone else, Heather?
Christina Anthus.
Christina, is she on our list?
Yes, I'm on Zoom. Can you guys hear me okay? Okay, great, thank you. Well, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Christina Anthus.
Christina, I'll let you know you have 2 minutes.
Yes, ma'am, thank you.
Thank you.
I'm from Aden, California. I'm representing 1,700 concerned citizens from across the U.S. in the Justice for Wyoming Wolves group. Madam Chair and committee, I'd like to thank you for your time today. One thing I'd like to request is that the board consider adding a non-consumptive member to the predator treatment group. I believe that would be valuable. I'd like to request the committee introduce legislature to include predatory animals, trophy game animals, wildlife, all animals in your animal cruelty statutes. Predators deserve the dignity of a humane death like all other animals. I'd like to request that the group ban chasing, maiming, killing by crushing. Crushing is illegal according to the PACT Act, by snow machine or other vehicle, or by swinging an animal against a snow machine or other motorized vehicle in order to cause harm or death, as well as using gasoline, water, fire, and or harmful chemicals to torture, maim, prolong death with the intent to kill any animal. These methods of thrill killing are not moral or ethical. It's very concerning to the public. I'd like to ask the group that they write a statute making it against the law to expose children to animal cruelty. That would eliminate the use of hounds. Oh no, I was just talking about fair chase ethics, eliminating the use of hounds, dogs, laser sights, wire snares, the abolition of the predator zone, as they enable individuals to pursue and capture animals with ease, leading to instances of extreme animal cruelty and suffering. These are just forms of entertainment for, deranged type people. Please introduce a hunting license for predators, as well as a hunter education program. Also, please introduce a bill that makes it illegal to engage in sexual relations with an animal. It would do well just to leave these animals alone. They would balance each other out. I think you'd find the coyotes would predate on everything else. The raccoons would get the red foxes and stray cats and skunks. The wolves would take care of the coyotes and themselves. The number one cause of death for wolves is interpack conflict. They can manage their own numbers and maybe also that massive overstock of fat elk.
Your time is up. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Anyone else online? Okay. So that was the end of the online testimony. So we will close that testimony and move on to our next agenda item, which is the Wyoming Wildlife and Natural Resources Trust Fund. Mr. Budd, you could join us and give us your report.
Madam Chair?
Yes, Representative Storr.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to say, because the TRW committee hasn't really had an opportunity to discuss the treatment of predator working group.
Once again, Liz, we can't hear you very well.
Sorry, don't know why that is. Anyway, I just want to say that if anyone has questions or comments from the committee, please reach out.
Thank you. Director Bud.
Madam Chair, if you'd have called on me earlier, we could have got rid of Nesvik sooner.
Yeah. What were we thinking?
Think about that, right? Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to share some time with you today. As I told the co-chairs at lunch, I'm not going to give the standard PowerPoint. You saw that last year that goes through how we operate. Instead, I'd like to just take a few minutes and talk about 2 or 3 different areas. The first is that whether or not people realize it, next year in February will mark the 20th anniversary of the creation of the Wildlife and Natural Resource Trust. We've been operating for 19 years. Starting next year, we will be start on our 20th year of granting projects. To date, we've reviewed over 1,600 projects in all the counties of the state. The board has allocated about $125 million to about 75 to 80% of those projects, the ones that were selected. That has led to $1 billion in conservation on the ground. That tells you a little bit about our leverage. We get, right now, we're averaging over the course of the program about 7 to 1. Those dollars come from NGOs, from federal dollars, for all the different federal agencies, from private donations, foundations, and others. We have worked with 150 different partners. When you think about each conservation district, weed and pest districts, BLM offices, Forest Service offices, there's now over 150 of those that we have done contracts with. And one thing that I think we remain very proud of is that we do all of this with less than a 5% overhead. So for what we spend every year, it costs the people of Wyoming less than 5% to administer the program. The administration is myself and my grants manager, Hillary Wasserberger, and we intend to keep it that way. Let me shift a minute because I think it's important to remind people our job is to fund good work on the ground. I recall years ago when this program started, one of the distinguished members of the Senate came up and said, "I don't know why we give you money, you spend it." And I said, well, if you read the law, that's what we're supposed to do. I think a lot of times people get confused by that. We're not an entity that's trying to hoard money or build up or amass money. We want that money to go on the ground. We want that to support local communities and the work that they do. To do that well, one of the greatest, I think, returns from this program has been the team building that it's created. You think back 20 years ago, there were a lot of these entities would not sit in a room with each other. And we literally had conversations with people who applied. As an example, we had one entity apply to do a river project. And I said, have you talked to Game and Fish about this? And they said, no, we don't get along. And the board rejected it. Came back 6 months later, and both of them showed up together, and they had a project that they thought they could agree on. We've seen that across the board. Agriculture working with conservation organizations and reaching out to each other to get that kind of teamwork and that kind of camaraderie. And I think that's honestly played into a lot of other arenas at the same time. That people who would have been automatically dismissive of others have found that they have a common goal in whether it's fishing or whether it's scenery or whether it's hunting or non-consumptive wildlife. That's been a tremendous, I think, asset to our state to have that. And you look at that and how it extends itself. We do things very differently in the state of Wyoming when it comes to wildlife and natural resource management. Our immediate reaction now is to say, let's put a group together that's diverse and see if we can't come up with a solution. We've done it on sage grouse. We've done it on bighorn sheep. We've done it on rivers. We've done it on migration and animal movement. And I think that speaks loudly to the type of people that we are in Wyoming and the way that we think things should be done. I also want to point out the importance of the board, citizen board. I know tomorrow you're going to be thinking about the Recreation Trust Fund and how that it's administered. I could not have asked for a better board. And that goes back to 2005 when we started. We've not had a single board member who was not stellar. They are people who are committed, they give of their own time, they get compensated for their travel and their meals. They get nothing else. And they spend a lot of time on the ground. I'd extend that same support to the select committees that we've worked with over the years. And that one, a few years ago, some of you will recall, there was a move afoot to say, let's get rid of these. They don't really serve a purpose. Ours does serve a purpose, and they work hand in hand with us. Representative Byron can tell you, he sits on there now. Senator Boner chaired that at one point in time. A number of people have served on that. It is a partnership between the legislature and the executive branch to make sure that we're seeing things and hearing things the same. And that's been incredibly valuable a couple of times where the board came forward with a project and sat down with the select committee, and one of them happened right here in this room, and they said, I don't think we like that. And we talked about it, worked it out, and ultimately that project did not move forward. And so I think it's important that we have that kind of open dialogue and we have that kind of a relationship. Another thing about the program that I think sets it apart and makes it different is that we actually do granting twice a year. So the mentality of the board and the staff is that we're trying to find a way to fund a project. Projects, when they come in, it's a good idea. Somebody had a good idea. What if we fixed the river? What if we cleaned up this? What if we built a wetland over here where we could have birds and fish? What if we had a combination fish pond for kids, but it also served as nesting habitat for birds? When those come in, a lot of times they are just that germ of a thought. And what we try to do, and the mentality of the board and staff is, how do we get that project to where it's really a good project, where it's doable, it's sustainable, and the support of the entire community will be behind it? So the 2 application periods allow us to do that in a much faster fashion than if you think about a lot of grant programs. I come in, I write the grant, you look at it, you say, no, we don't like it. Well, the next year I come back and I've got it and I've tweaked it a little bit, and you still don't like it. We're able, by doing grants twice a year, to say, okay, this got turned down this time. We'll work with you to fill in the gaps that the board saw in that project, and then let's fill those in and bring them back in 6 months, and you'll be able to do it within a year instead of looking 2-3 years down the road. And I think that's critical. The other thing, and some of you have been with us on these, without the site visits that the board does, this program would not be as effective as it is. We set foot on every project that gets submitted that the board chooses to look at. Representative Angelos got to go on one of those with us this spring. It was great, a great day in northern Campbell County. And I think I'd be tickled if she'd tell you what she found. But they're not simple. They're not, you just drive around and look at scenery. You're looking at their budget. You're looking at their permitting. You talk to the people on the ground who are going to be affected by the project. You ask about what works, what doesn't work. And so when the board gets that project back to look at it, they're able to fashion that in a way that it makes sense, and you can do things. Just as an example, we asked on that site visit I mentioned with Representative Angelos, if you get part of the funding because we don't have that much to give right now, how would you allocate that? And the answer came back, well, we have 4 areas. We would probably look at maybe doing one of them entirely and then coming back with the other 3, or maybe we just do the fencing in all 4, or maybe we do the water development. It wasn't something that they had thought through. At the end of the day, they came back and said, this is how we would stratify that if it came down to that. And the board loved it. And so it was funded, partially funded, and then they can come back later. But it let them build on what's the most important thing. I think if I recall correctly on that one, it was fencing. So if that gets done, then we can do the water piece. And if that gets done, then we can do the invasives piece. And you can see how they all lay on top of each other. That said, I'll leave that for a minute and we can come back if you have questions about it. What I really want to do is talk to you a little bit about what I think the key issues that we're going to face in the next few years are. And many of you will probably sit on this committee and we'll be back to talk about them. The first one is how we engage and how we interact with the Endangered Species Act. The Endangered Species Act is an incredibly powerful act. And it is very simple to go in and petition a species for listing. We've had numerous species in this state that have been petitioned. We have been fortunate to beat back a lot of those because of the work that the Wildlife Trust has funded and the work that our Stellar Game and Fish Agency does and our conservation districts and other. But to give you some examples, cutthroat trout have been petitioned, and not just cutthroat trout, but different subspecies. Bonneville cutthroat trout being one in particular. How was that not listed? One of the key things that they asked for in that petition was they've lost access to all of their spawning habitats and they're completely blocked off from that. We have in the last 20 years added literally hundreds of miles of stream to where fish can spawn now, and that particular objection is no longer valid. That's the kind of thing we can do. You look at what we've been able to do relative to sage grouse with habitat enhancement, conservation easements, the designation of different areas. Look at those things and say, yeah, if you want to talk about what the threats to the species are, here's what we're doing to address them. That is not going to end. It'll be the next species they pick, whether it's the pygmy rabbit or the midget faded rattlesnake or some other obscure species that we don't know much about. And so we play a very important role in being able to say, okay, they may be rare, but here's what we've done for the habitat that they need in their area. Secondly, invasive species, and I'm not going to talk about aquatic invasives. We all know that if we end up in that bailiwick, we've got a massive problem. We do not have that problem today, and we hope that we don't get it. But we do have two different terrestrial problems. One is invasive annual grasses. You all recall cheatgrass, medusa head, ventonata. If we don't get on these and try to stay ahead of them, this state could see devastating losses. Fiscal losses to agriculture, fire, loss of property, and ultimate changing of our entire landscapes, and that is not where we want to go. Last year, the legislature allocated $9 million in additional funding for invasive annual grass treatment. That money will be allocated in December. A third of that was allocated in June by the board. That's how fast we've gotten on that. We are assured that the chemical indaziflam that is used, which is effective, will be approved on BLM lands by late this summer. So we are moving ahead with the notion that we will do that. And I will tell you that I've already submitted my supplemental budget request, which would ask for the remainder of the $20 million the governor asked for during the last budget session. We all understand JAC cut that back to 10. It was cut back in conference to 9, but the need has not gone away. So you may hear about that as we move forward. The other terrestrial is one that people don't think about because it isn't a non-native species, but that is the conifer encroachment that is happening all over the state. One of the biggest areas where we have concern with loss of habitat is aspen woodlands. And the biggest cause of that is the fact that we've not had fire and we've not had timber harvest. So you've got conifers that encroach into that. That dries those sites up. It wipes those aspens out. Aspens are the second most productive ecotype in the Rocky Mountain region behind riparian areas. And we're losing them at incredible rates. Conifers also affect things like curl leaf and true mountain mahogany, where we've been able to go in and do treatments along this front. The response has been phenomenal. We looked at some this year where you see leader growth 6 inches to a foot long. That's a primary winter staple for deer. And we do have concerns about deer. So those are two areas we work on. The conifer one a lot of times falls under what you'd call healthy forest initiatives. There's one in northeast Wyoming that was funded this spring, again, at a large chunk, where that's going in and cleaning up invasive conifers to allow the ones, the ponderosas, to grow and thrive in the way that they should. The third, water, both quantity and quality, but primarily I think what we need to be aware of is quantity. We are not yielding the amount of water that we historically have. That isn't entirely because we don't have that amount of water falling in the form of snow or of rain. It's because, in a lot of cases, we have invasive species or we have encroaching species that are taking that water up and never letting it get into the aquifers. And that is something that we have to start thinking about on a whole landscape, whole watershed basis. I sat in a meeting yesterday looking at the potential for several $1 million worth of IRA funding in the Colorado River Basin, in which they said, we want people to do practices that enhance water. Well, to me, that's everything you do. That's conifer removal. That's rangeland enhancement that increases infiltration of water into the soil and not just running off and going down the creek. Ultimately, those all pay back. But I think we're going to have to focus very hard on water. And certainly, Representative Singh, you've heard the conversations in Cheyenne about how much of that water is coming out of the Colorado River Basin, and that's a junior water right. The potential for us to have catastrophic water issues in this state is right here and now. Fourth area, and this really kind of just blew up after COVID, and it's the whole rural residential explosion that we're seeing all over the state. That's happening in some really critical wildlife habitat areas. It also affects then how do you manage fire? How do you manage water yield? How do you manage water retention? How do you deal with all of the different things that make up an ecosystem when you've got to dodge or deal with that in particular? Some of you will remember that last session, Representative Northrup brought an amendment to the budget to allocate additional money in northern Wyoming for conservation easements on farm ground. Powell has just been bombed with houses on what were farms. And as you add that density of housing, now you can no longer farm it. You've taken that economic enterprise out of the community. You've added an economic cost in the form of rural residential property. And there's no making up the difference. So rural residential, there are very little or no restrictions. And there are no incentives for landowners to take some other course. And that's something that we need to work on, I think, as we move forward. Finally, those key issues, migration and movement. We've learned a great deal about how these animals use landscapes. There is a difference between migration and seasonal movement, but the amount of loss that is out there in property damage, the amount of loss to our wildlife resource, the amount of loss that we have potentially of human life is something that has to be focused on. We're embarking, as you know, I think we did the KC to Buffalo project that got wrapped up early last year. We're now in the Dry Piney project between Big Piney and LaBarge was completed. Kemmer is now on board for the next one, which would be the area of South Kemmer from there to Evanston. Those are huge, expensive projects, but they're very important. And if you look, when I talked about endangered species, if you look at the decline that we've seen in mule deer, we need to do everything we can to maintain those species. Finally, I would just point out on the funding side, there was a bill last year that would have created an endowment model for how the funding for the trust is managed. That bill failed to receive votes for introduction in the House, so hopefully it'll be back this time. It changes the model to allow the treasurer to invest these funds much more aggressively than what we are. Consequently, we're looking at the potential for considerably more yield, which inflation-proofs the fund. The idea being that if we set a spending limit of 4%, which would be $8 million a year, and we earn more than 4%, that goes into the corpus. The next year, 4% is more than $8 million, and you can continue to build that corpus and inflation-proof the fund. I'm hoping that you'll be in a position to support that as it comes back as we move forward. I realize that's a little different, fairly summary, but I think you've all been familiar with what we do to the point I don't want to drag you through another PowerPoint that you've already seen or you already know, and I'd be more than happy to answer any questions you might have.
Questions? Representative Western.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Director Bud, does the BLM not allow Rejuvra when they're fighting some of those invasives on their lands?
Director.
I'm not sure, they do not allow Rejuvra at this point.
They do not, okay.
They do not. And it required an EIS. The governor worked really hard on this. A lot of us did to get them to expedite that. They've gone through the EIS process. Yet, as I understand it, it's waiting for a signature, and we should have that approved here any day.
A follow-up.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Do you know, has there been any research done on just the dynamic of aspen stands as it pertains to this specific climate? I know it's been an issue, but has either the Monte Shop or any of those guys, have they kind of dug in and done any peer-reviewed research on that one?
Director.
Madam Chair, Representative Western, there is a ton of research that's been done on aspen. The guy who wrote the book, literally, on aspen was from Utah State, Norbert DeBile. And I had the opportunity to work with him some in my early career. Yes, there's a lot of interrelationships with aspen to elevation. Too high, you don't get them. Too low, you don't get them. Water and water retention, soil type, and what kind of competition they have to deal with. As you all know, you've all been out, you can tip an aspen tree over pretty easily. Their roots are this far down and that's it. They don't have a big old taproot. So you've got to have water for them and nutrients at a fairly immediate level. That's what happens to them when they get desiccated because you dry up those sites, is they can't go anywhere else. Their feet aren't in water and they're going to tip over and die. And I don't know whether you're headed there or not, but if as an example, you're thinking about, are we seeing effects from climate change? Probably not massive effects there. Now, if we can get all of the other issues dealt with, then maybe we can start to tease out whether or not there's a climate change issue. It's an incredible species, aspen. It's dependent on beaver, but beaver can wipe them out. So there's a balanced thing with aspen on almost every front. But what we do know is when they're healthy, a lot of other things are healthy.
Question?
Thank you. One last follow-up. Director Bud, I know we've had the conversation on Russian olives for years and years now. Has there been any kind of assessment on really truly saying, all right, we've solved the problem to this extent, but this is how much we have left? Because I know, obviously, we talk about water. That's a really big one, and factoring that. How much of the problem have we solved, and how much remains?
Director.
Madam Chair, Representing Western, I don't know that we've done that assessment. I could get back with the Weed and Pest Council and see. In some areas, we've done extensive control. We've picked that back up this year. We got several applications for olive and salt cedar control. The problem is that if you don't do it in a big enough scale, they're right back on top of you. And as you've noted, there is a huge water budget for those species. I've heard different numbers. They've calculated them out in the hundreds of gallons per day per plant range that is being lost to the ground. And so, I think some of you heard a story. Early on when the trust started, we did a project at Yellowtail in Bighorn County in which they went out and cut olive and salt cedar. And as they were doing it one day, the operator of the skid steer realizes he's getting stuck. And he looks down and there's water coming over the tracks of the skid steer. This is like 3-4 days into the project. They had to scurry and get every chain they could find in Bighorn County, hook it to an excavator and pull him out, because as they removed those olives and salt cedars, the water that they were using up was going back into the wetland and creating a huge quagmire that nobody expected. We've seen the same thing happen just on the backside of Casper Mountain, where they were removing conifers from an aspen area, And the landowner came up and said, well, that's a good place to have a picnic. And they said, yeah, this little creek's awful nice. And he looked at him and said, I've lived here 60 years, I've never seen it run water. It's that quick, and it's that much water.
Representative Burkhardt had a question, and then we'll go to you.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. So Director Bud, you mentioned Endangered Species Act, and I think we've covered all the column oddball things in Wyoming that could be endangered species. That leaves us with the things we're used to, large ungulates, some of the birds, some of that. What would be the impact of listing any of those, let's call them major animals at this point for the state?
Madam Chair, Representative Burkhardt, you just think about what we looked at and see these studies that were done on what the impact of sage grouse would be. Now, if you expand that to bobolinks, or you expand that to sage sparrows, sage thrashers, McCowan's longspurs, you start the list of birds is hundreds long, and they're everywhere. They're ubiquitous. You take something like mule deer, they're in every county. They are ubiquitous. So how do you manage something like that? And, you know, what we need to be able to say is we have adequate regulatory mechanisms, we have habitat for them, and we are managing to sustain those populations. And that's where we've always been as a state. But yeah, any one of those could have massive consequences.
Good. Co-Chairman Schuler.
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair, Madam Chairman, excuse me. My question, you and I talked a little bit at lunch of the cheatgrass and the Medusa head issues. I know weed and pest districts around the state are probably working hard on it. I know in a few districts I'm aware of some of the things they're doing, but do you have some major projects where maybe those concentrations of those grasses are really getting away from us and we need to jump on them?
Director.
Madam Chair, Madam Co-Chair, I'm really excited about where we're headed. And remember when I started out, I talked about the importance of partnerships. This year, based on that allocation that the legislature made of $9 million, they have now started to create collaboratives between the weed and pest districts. So if you look at where you live, Madam Co-Chair, Uintah County, Sweetwater County, Lincoln, Teton, and Sublet are all meeting together to lay out what their highest priorities are, where their funding should go first, how much it's going to take to get everything done, and they've mapped it. We've already started in Sweetwater County. We made 2 allocations down there to address that issue and had that same site visit where we said, what's the highest priority? What can you do right now? And sat down with Weed and Pest, Game and Fish, Conservation District, and others, and came up with that hit list, if you will, of what will get done. We've done the same thing. The Bighorn Basin is starting another collaborative where they're going to go through that same process. Northeast Wyoming is working in the same vein. We've had really good collaborative up there, particularly in Johnson, Campbell, and Sheridan counties because of the Medusa head and Venata issue. But that's how we'll get on top of that. And that's where we're trying to get to. When I testified before the JAC last year and they asked what that's going to take, the estimate for treatment of the most egregious invasive annual grasses is about $80 million. So it's going to take about $20 million it's going to take that over, we think we can do that over an 8-year period. So 4 bienniums, you could get to that number. Now that may be low and it may be high, but we are able to leverage that with other funds, and we're doing that now, particularly with BLM funding and some Forest Service funding.
Follow up? Representative Western.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Director Bud, you know, I feel like I was told this at one time, but of course I forgot. Where's the NRCS in all this? I know at one point they've been really helpful with some of these cheatgrasses and stuff, but are they as active as they once were? You know?
Madam Chair, Representative.
And I have a issue with acronyms not explained. So if you could say what NRCS is, that would be appreciated.
Yeah, USDA, the National.
I'll do it.
Resource Conservation, something.
Yeah. So, Madam Chair, Representative Western, Natural Resource Conservation Service, which is the old Soil Conservation Service, is a very active partner. they work a little differently than we do in the sense that a lot of their programs are landowner specific. So you, the landowner, would apply for a contract to do a different practice, whatever it might be. Then we would come in and maybe help fund that or expand to another piece of it. But they're very active. They are a major funder on conservation easements. They are a major funder on river projects. Invasives, a little less so. But the other thing about NRCS is there's a program called the Joint Chiefs Awards, which Wyoming has received numerous of, which are the chief of the Forest Service and the chief of the NRCS, give large block grants to areas. Sublette County and that whole Wyoming range has gotten one of those. The Little Snake River Valley has got one of those. I believe the Bear River got one as well. So that's another way that they're active, but we work directly with them on a lot of projects. They're probably, they and Game and Fish would be the most common partner on any project that we do.
Any other questions for Director Bud? I had a question in the notebook that you sent. There are a lot of things that say, what do you propose to improve over the next 2 years? And so could you just briefly go over those things, if you don't mind?
I'd be happy to. So on leverage, and these metrics were created years ago. I still think they work, but in order to keep the data correct, you got to keep doing them. So the anomaly on there, that 9.34 leverage that you see on that chart, that was 2 easements in 1 year in Teton County. The vast majority of that was donated, so the leverage went through the roof. We're in about where we should be. If you look at that ranging in that 5 to 6 to 1. The 4.64 that we hit this year was a little lower, partly because projects are getting bigger. And so if you look at the scale and the scope, and that's partly been driven by the board, where they would come in and say, we're going to fix a mile of the Encampment River. And then the next year they'd come in and say, well, we're going to fix a different mile of the Encampment River. And that's one that specifically we came back and said, no, you're going to give us an entire Encampment River plan so we know how much it's going to take, how many years it's going to take, and then the board will fund it probably at a higher level because we can see that it can be done. We just did that with the Bear River, and now we're looking at the entirety of the Bear River, not just at those pieces that have been done. It's fine to start with the pieces that are the most egregious, but at some point you have to look at that whole system, or you're not doing anything. You're just putting Band-Aids on a wound. And so that one, how do you improve the performance? Alternative funding, clearly. And the more that we can find that, you can probably look at some point, we'll be able, and I'd just say there, let's be honest when we count it. If we were to say, oh, look at all the money that came through ARPA and all that, and just count that somehow, that's not fair. It's on the projects that we're funding, how much came from other sources. And then ensuring the local investment, that's critical, because if there's not local investment, if there's no skin in the game, there's not money on the table, your project has a very high potential of not succeeding. The minute that people are invested in it, it's going to succeed and it's going to thrive forever. So that's an example there. Did you have one in particular that you wanted to?
Thank you. There was one about a reserve fund.
That's the second one, the percentage of applications funded, where it says current discussion about means to inflation-proof the fund is timely.
Right.
That's what I was talking about with the endowment model.
I think it's the project funding from trust revenue. And it mentions, to place revenues in a fund that would generate income. So that's that one. Okay,
Yeah.
okay, thank you.
So the history of how this started, people were very nervous about this program when the bill passed in '05. And one way that you can protect against things you're nervous about is don't give them any money. So the bill said that it should have a minimum of $200 million. We got 15 million, which would generate a cup of coffee in a couple of towns. And so the deal we struck with the legislature then was, okay, for you to see how not scary we really are, we have to function as if we were fully funded. So the general fund was putting project money in and saying, okay, run like you were at 200 million and earning 4%, and we did that. Well, that worked, and then they started to add more money to the corpus, and we would back off the request from the general fund for projects. And all of that worked really well for everybody until about halfway through Governor Mead's term when the economy went bankrupt. And all of a sudden it was, no, there's no more money for this, and we're not putting any more in the corpus. And you're going to operate totally out of the corpus. And we made that adjustment. Since then, we've been able to build that corpus back up. But if you think that you can operate out of that and keep up, just look at what inflation's done to us in the last three years. You know, when we did the site visit up in the Bighorn Basin 2 years ago, we showed you two different fish screens and fish ladders. One of them cost twice what the other one did, and it was only a year and a half later that it was built. That was what inflation did, and they were essentially the same thing. So that's what I'm talking about there, is that I hope that people will look at this as a potential place to put funding for things that are above and beyond what are the normal functions that we would do. A good example of that is the cheatgrass money that we had last year. Another example is when we started going on highway crossings, the legislature put in 10 million and they put restrictions on it. They said that was only to be 20% match, which it has been. But that money then went into would now be 3 projects. We'll probably get 3 projects done because of that leverage that was out there because the state said do this. The same is going to be true with other things that you find important or that the people of Wyoming find important. I don't come in and ask, I didn't last time, for funding unless it's something that I've been told we've got to get on this. But that's what that's talking about, is how much of that funding from trust resources. If it's all coming from the revenue off the trust, that number is obviously lower than if that's supplemented by other funding.
Thank you. Any other questions? Does that wrap up? Okay, cool. And we're an hour early. That's awesome. Brian, did you have anything? I see that you're on the Federal Natural Resource Committee. Oh, you're good? Okay. Just in the neighborhood, wanted to see our shining faces? All right, good. So tomorrow, we will be going to the Edna K. Wilkins State Park, and I'm going to ask Chris Floyd to come up and give us a little short synopsis of how that day is going to look, or the morning. Thank you, Chris, for joining us.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Chris Floyd, Deputy Director of State Parks. So we'll meet out at the state park at 8:30. We're going to meet at the shelter called Platte River. The address is 8700 East Highway 20. You can just Google if you want Edna K. Wilkins State Park. When you go through the park entrance, you'll go about half a mile down past the little beach with the little lake there, and the shelter called Platte River will be on the right. So we'll be there. We've got about hour and 45 minute, 2-hour tour set up for you. We've got some local speakers coming as well. Some of our stakeholders and friends will be there. And of course, the staff will be lined up as well to answer any questions and let you see all the major features of the park.
So for coming down I-25 headed south, we would take the exit 182, I think,
The Hat 6.
the Hat 6, Hat 6 road exit.
Yep.
And then there are signs from there, I believe.
Yep.
Okay. And then, so we'll do that, and that'll be terrific. I love our field trips. Any questions about our field trip? Okay, I guess we're good. We'll see you in the morning.
Okay,
That'll
looking
be
forward to
great.
it. Thank you.
Perfect. Any other public comment or any other things that we need to discuss? LSO, you're good? Committee, you're good? So we'll see you in the morning. We will be back here at 11 o'clock, and the Arts Alliance will give us their report. Then the Arts Alliance is hosting lunch for us at 321 Art, which is just a walking distance from here. And then we will have state parks for the rest of the day. So I guess go enjoy your evening. Thank you so much.